Hello, Steeler Nation, and welcome to your SteelerNation.com podcast, sponsored by Total Sports Enterprises. Today, we're happy to have back nationally renowned sports attorney Dan Lust. Dan, welcome back to the show, man. How have you been, sir?
I'm good. Stryker, I see you've changed as well. I feel like your beard has grown like 10 inches.
It has. And before I was clean shaven, I tried to go COVID clean for the longest time. But once I hit October, I was done. and I just shaved for the first time. I did the sides and the mustache for Mother's Day last weekend.
I don't believe that you have touched that thing in a couple months. I do not believe that for 1 second.
But it has, and your hair has gotten nice and well coiffed as well. You're getting some volume there, so you're looking well yourself.
I gotta get it a couple inches. I think with the hair, I get to 6 feet with the hair.
You're right. There you go. That's the way to do it. That's what I used to do with my mohawk back in the day.
That works
So, couple things I wanted to touch base about. I know we did a whole show the last time you were on COVID-19, and I at least wanted to touch base again about the way it seems to me as a fan. It seems like the COVID protocols were largely a success, especially across the NFL when you have so many players to deal with, lots of travel, minus a couple hiccups. Unfortunately, a couple hiccups hit the Steelers directly, but by and large, they got through the entire season. So, how is the protocols working, and how do you see them kind of working for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I'd say for the most part, the season was a success. I know the Titans got kicked around a little bit. My Bills got a little twisted sideways with a couple games. But they got to the finish line, and I think a lot of credit goes. We talk about Roger Goodell when we're mad at him for something, but let's give him credit. The draft last year was the first real sporting event that occurred. And the world was saying to shut down the draft, and Goodell said it should go forward. And, I think he ended up being right. Yeah. And that was kind of the signal that sports can slowly make their way back. So, no sport had a perfect COVID protocol. Maybe the NBA, right? They had less positive tests than other sports, but the NBA spent a fortune doing that. And they're still digging out of that financial hole. So, I think, we can give the NFL certainly passing grades. They got to the finish line. And I think they're obviously getting a little laxer, which is good. It's a sign the country's coming back with fans entering stadiums and getting that real crowd noise in. I know it helped my Bills. It probably willed my Bills to one more win than they were deserving of last year.
Well, they got one over the Steelers, so I know that helped them there.
It definitely did. Did. But so I'll say, a lot of people will talk ill of the NFL and COVID protocols and whatnot, but I really do think that the NFL, they did as good of a job as they could under very chaotic circumstances.
So moving forward, do you see any new rules being enacted or rules staying in place for this upcoming season? Or do you think we're going to start hitting herd immunity here, and this is going to be kind of like a moot point once we start hitting the preseason?
I mean, it's tough to tell. I think they're going to try to keep the world intact. I mean, I remember last year the insanity that occurred with the Denver Broncos quarterback situation.
Yes.
I have to think they're not, when there's a situation, and for those that don't recall, the Broncos had to play a practice squad wide receiver as their starting quarterback because they didn't have enough guys in the room. So basically, if one quarterback tested positive or was in COVID protocol, he had to rule out everyone in the room, the quarterback coaches, which I think was probably, he's obviously erring on the side of caution, but extreme caution. And I don't think the world is in the same place that we were a year ago,
true.
For better, for worse, obviously with the vaccine coming out and people just knowing how to deal with it. So, I think we're not going to see a situation like that again where complete positions are ruled out. I think we feel a little bit safer. And obviously, if to mention the health in the room, a lot of players are going to be vaccinated, so we're not going to have that issue. So I imagine just, the NFL will go off on a much smoother base than it did this time last year.
Fantastic. And I know at least in the state of Maryland, they're releasing all businesses are going to be open full capacity on Saturday, including outdoor venues, outdoor sporting events. So, if Maryland's falling in line, hopefully the rest of the country will be falling in line here in the next couple months to open everything up for the football season, which would be great to see again. First thing I wanted to talk to you about too specifically, which is why I reached out to you, was Steeler Nation has been chatting back and forth about Justin Lane. He was arrested on suspicion of felony transportation of a firearm inside of his vehicle, and he was charged with 2 misdemeanors, and those were driving with a suspended license and exceeding the speed limit. So he just pleaded guilty on Wednesday. to a misdemeanor charge. And the misdemeanor charge is now of possessing criminal tools in the 2 traffic violations that I just mentioned. So he received a 180-day jail sentence that was suspended, and he must serve 6 months probation and perform 32 hours of community service. Now, moving forward, does this plea have any consequences to him being able to play football this year, or is there anything that you think that the NFL could do to give him a penalty for these charges?
Yeah, so I guess first and foremost, the terms that it's a little confusing the way they explain this plea deal. So obviously a felony was on the table for people that know it. A felony is anything that equates to over a year in prison. Anything up to a year is called a misdemeanor, and then there's violations and there's stuff that's less than that. So when he decided to take a plea, he took a felony off the table and he replaced it with a misdemeanor. It's up to a year. Now, the 6-month suspended sentence and the 6 months probation, it's a fancy way of saying if he's good for the next 6 months, we're going to throw out that sentence. It's called, at least the way I read the plea, is it's a conditional sentence. So if he's good for the next 6 months, he does his 32 hours of community service, he pays his fine, whatever he needs to do, there's no issues, he's not going to have to serve any jail time, which is important. You tend to take a plea deal if the evidence is strong against you for whatever case is. You don't, not necessarily, but especially if you're going to take something like that, you have to think that the case is pretty strong. So what we had here, at least what was reported, he was driving with a suspended license, and then he admitted to cops that there was some type of handgun in the car. So he had thought, at least this is according to reports, that he had cleared up the issue that would have caused his license to be suspended. But that's kind of black and white. Your license is either suspended or it's not. And if you're found with some type of infraction while driving with a suspended license, that can ratchet up something that's normally a misdemeanor to something like a felony. Or it's just gonna, more like a quantity argument. You got to knock out a couple of things to get down. So why I mentioned that the evidence probably was strong against him. He's right now, right, under the NFL personal conduct policy, you don't need to be found guilty at some type of trial in order to face a suspension. It's a very low bar to be hit with a suspension in the NFL, as we've seen. You don't really actually have to be found guilty of anything. The plea deal is admitting guilt. We don't really know exactly what occurred, but yeah, I'd be surprised if there isn't some type of suspension that comes from this. Usually weapons offenses do result in some type of suspension. If it's not, I'm happy to be wrong, but usually that's how the NFL deals with this. It's not going to be, some type of 10-game crazy suspension. I wouldn't think so as a, my vantage point. I don't see something like that possible. Obviously, Justin played a big role in the team last year. I don't see some type of extended suspension, but I will say if you do take this type of plea deal, probably the evidence was pretty good against you because you're facing some type of suspension on your your NFL record.
Great. And that's what we want to know, because obviously the Steelers wide receiver room got depleted with Nelson leaving, being cut, and Mike Hilton leaving and going free agency to the Cincinnati Bengals, being down another outside corner who we're used to having. It does affect at least the way the Steelers are viewing the season. So you're saying at least if he does get suspended, it looks like it would be a small suspension, maybe a couple games, but we'll have to look to see how the league would rule on that. But thank you very much for your input on that, Dan. And moving on to, there's something that came out in contracts this year that I personally wasn't aware of, and I follow contracts pretty closely. I'm a amateur capologist, as I'd like to call myself, but the new term was voidable years for NFL contracts, and that seemed like a new tool, kind of like to circumvent the cap not rising this year and actually falling. Is this the case, and does the NFL plan on keeping voidable years for contracts in the future?
I don't know. It's tough. I think the issue that keeps coming up when we hear these news stories, it's like a contract is reported as being X amount of million over a certain amount of years, but it's not really the case because you can cut a guy at a certain point and it has no cap ramification. So I don't know. I mean, I think it would be odd that there was, it's, again, I guess it's coming back to COVID. Yeah. COVID cost a significant financial toll on the league. So if the money has to be going somewhere. So if they're going to try to make that up by adjusting the voidable years on the back end of contracts, or at least being a little bit more transparent about what they're doing, I think that's probably makes sense, because the numbers that are being reported in these contracts are just, they're like funny money. It's not real. Yeah. It's not the amount of money that's being paid out. I'm going to, for every 10 contracts that you hear are reported as, we'll make up a number, right? Like $100 million is being paid to the athlete. Like that never happens. They never see the full end of it. And it's maybe not necessarily fair to players, but the teams do have a right within those contracts. So yeah, I mean, we'll see how the NFL treats it moving forward. But I know, this year is going to be a tough year for the NFL. So if they had to change the rules just for this year and revisit it next year, I'm sure that's also a possibility. But yeah, I mean, obviously they had to get a little bit creative with the cash shortage reaching the NFL, really all 32 teams, with the lack of fans.
Yeah, and that's the way it seemed like they did it this year. Is it's essentially treated like a tag, like you're tagging a player for a year, but unlike with the tag where you can't spread it out over years, they're spreading it out over the avoidable years, which just seemed odd to me. But like we're saying, yeah, I agree with you with having the reduction in salary cap. They had to find a way to try to get teams like the Saints and Steelers under it so we could be, and manage the cap and manage the team and keep moving forward. So here's a topic that we were discussing too online. I know, chatting back and forth, and it's something that we as fans are aware of. Deshaun Watson was linked as possibly being a player that seems like every quarterback is linked to the Steelers if they come up right now. But Deshaun Watson, he's currently dealing with some legal issues, and I want to get your opinion on it, your personal opinion, you being in the law profession. What is going on with Deshaun, and how is it affecting him in the NFL currently?
This is, I was going to say the $100 million question, but it could honestly be more than that, because it has the impact to change a lot of fortunes in the NFL. So, I mean, for those that are, unless you're living under a rock, Deshaun Watson has been charged with 20, not charged, but he's been hit with 20 civil lawsuits. And that's a fancy way of saying an individual has sued him in civil court. The best way that I explain civil court versus criminal court is that fun OJ case way back when. Mm-hmm. Criminal case requires something that's called beyond a reasonable doubt, something like 90% guilt. That's the confidence level the jury has to have, 95% beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah. And a civil case requires something that's called beyond a preponderance of the evidence, which is a really fancy way of saying when you weigh all the evidence, does it come out 51% of one side? Okay, it's going to be culpable. So that's how someone like OJ can be found innocent on criminal charges, because maybe it's not necessarily 90, but it's somewhere above 51. So Watson right now is only dealing with the civil cases. Civil cases don't necessarily, mean that much, right? Anybody can sue anyone for anything. Stryker, I could sue you for your beard right now.
Damn it.
That you lied to me about grooming that thing at some point during the pandemic, which I do not believe you at any point.
I'm not cutting it.
Each their own, but there is no bar to the courthouse steps. Any individual can sue anyone else for anything. It's another question of whether or not you can win, and it's another question of whether or not you're going to face some type of discipline for filing false charges, right? Yeah. But that said, if a DA, a district attorney's office, picks up a case and files criminal charges, that's telling fans, that's telling the NFL that we, as the Harris County DA's office, that's what the DA's office over in Houston is, we feel that we can get a conviction by a 90% or 95% confidence rate. So, historically in the NFL, when criminal charges come, that's when a suspension from the NFL is almost a virtual certainty. Yeah. Now, beneath that, right? Okay, so that's the easy one, right? If there are criminal charges, which there very much could be with what's going on in this case, and by no means would I be shocked if that occurs sometime within the next month. That would not shock me. There's a report that came out from the alleged victim's attorney that police have spoke with 8 alleged accusers of Deshaun Watson already in the past couple of weeks. So their investigation is being ratcheted up. The NFL, at least according to the attorney for these alleged victims, has spoke with 4 of these accusers. So you're having both chains moving, right? And you're also having big sponsors like Nike and Beats by Dre drop Deshaun Watson. So you're trending in the wrong direction. And I guess the other part, which I know NFL fans are curious about, like, okay, let's say there's no criminal charges. Can you suspend a guy just based on civil charges? And the short answer is, obviously you can. Will they? I think so. Watson here, his defense, he's got 2 defenses, Stryker, if you can follow me on this. Okay. First one's the obvious one, right? These masseuses are alleging that the acts that were committed were non-consensual, okay? That just means they didn't have permission to do whatever they're alleging he did. Yeah. First defense, everything was consensual. And I will say defense 1B is that Watson is making this interesting argument that, hey, these were massages and, there was money that was paid in exchange for these massages.
Mhm.
But at the same time, he's saying everything that occurred, when the door was closed, was consensual. So last I checked, prostitution is not legal in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And that could walk him down a really fine line where he could separately be suspended for what he's essentially admitting to.
Yeah.
Organizing some type of, prostitution. I don't want to call it a prostitution ring, but the numbers are pretty alarming. So there's a world where he gets suspended, even if he settles these cases, right, he can get suspended. Even if he goes to trial and wins on some type of weird prostitution defense, still can get suspended.
Yeah.
But the point that I try to make clear to all football fans, they're like, what's happening? Why is it taking so long? This case is at its absolute infancy. There was a complaint that was filed and an answer that was filed. That's the baseline. This is the part of discovery, right? When you have depositions and you're exchanging text messages, emails, this could take a year by itself.
Jeez.
And then you have 20 trials in theory, back to back to back to back in Harris County. That could take a couple months as well. So this is not, if it sees itself to fruition, it's going to take at least a year.
Is this going to class action because there's so many, or because I thought it was all being handled by the same attorney? It seemed to me like he advertised and said, like a mesothelioma ad essentially online. Have you been touched by Deshaun Watson? Please call into our number.
Except instead of on a commercial, he did it on Instagram stories.
Yes.
Yes. So no, it's not a class action lawsuit given the nature of these claims. So mesothelioma, you're going after the same accuser for essentially the same exact thing. And Stryker, your thought process is not wrong, but these are different victims. And although the allegations are somewhat similar, they are different dates, different people, different locations, and different, we'll say the nature seems to be pretty similar, but you can't put these all in a class action. So even though it's the same attorney, these are going to have to be
because each situation is different. Is that's the difference between class action and having to do it individually, because it's not like the same thing occurred with all of them. Yes.
And then I'll give you an interesting one. People are like, wow, this case, there was a report from Rich Eisen over at the NFL Network that a settlement was in the works. And I saw that. A couple people tagged me on Twitter, and I'm like, yeah, okay, the settlement's in the works. Okay. Do you know how hard it is to get a settlement with 20 different people, all with different sensibilities, right? Some people don't care about money. They care about, they care about burying Deshaun Watson. There are other people, right, that care about paying rent tomorrow. So, the issue with respect to people's, financial situations is going to very much depend on settlements. Maybe you settle 5 of these cases. You still could have 15 left. Maybe you settle 10. You still have 10 left. As long as one is still kicking around, that's what he's got to worry about. His career is very much, I don't want to make light of it, but with this many accusers, his career is certainly on the line. Never say never, but guys have made it back to the NFL. Even Big Ben once upon a time had his allegations, messy allegations. He made it back to the NFL. Mike Vick made it back to the NFL. This is messy. We have never seen something like this with the quantity of accusers involved, which is really unprecedented in pro sports. And
currently, are there any criminal allegations against him, or is it strictly civil?
So these technically, the same actions that are being, there's a lawsuit for in civil court, these could equate to criminal charges, just a matter of whether the DA's office wants to pick it up. I've been kind of, monitoring it, like, why wouldn't the DA's office take this? There's a world like, hey, Tony Busby, which I've been pretty vocal online on last month, like Tony Busby is the victims. He's the victim's attorney. All 20 plus victims that have filed, alleged victims that have filed lawsuits have had Tony Busby as their attorney. He's been a little showboaty. I don't think you're wrong to call this a media circus in some sense. So that in a state like Texas that are Texans fans, and you're kind of putting a gaslight to the Houston Texans nation. If the DA has to try a case in front of a jury that are Texans fans, right, that could muddy the waters. And the DA is not going to take a case where they're going to lose in and look really, they're going to look bad. And if they try a case and lose. So my legal reading of this, no one has told me this, I'm just reading it. Busby went from commenting on Instagram. He doesn't have a Twitter account, which for whatever reason, every single day, press conference, almost every single day. And he went from doing that to now not saying a word, not a peep. And some people, I think Rich Eisen, that's where his reports are coming from, that he got silent because a settlement was in the works. And I'm like, maybe he got silent because the DA's office they tapped Tony Busby on the shoulder and they said, listen, Tony, don't mess this case up for us. Don't mess this case up for your clients. Let us take a hold of this and let us really vet this. And, as was reported yesterday. Police are investigating his clients right now as we speak. So I think criminal case is very likely at this point.
Oh wow, that's tough for Deshaun Watson and Houston Nation. But thank you very much for giving us your insight on that. That's really nice. So we had another thing that we discussed the last time we were on the air, and it was about paying of college athletes. Now it seems like it's becoming more of a possibility, and we already know that California and Nebraska are set to start paying people for their name, image, and likeness in 2023. But now it seems like Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, and New Mexico are also falling in line. So how does this look for college athletes moving forward, being able to be paid for their name, image, and likeness?
Yeah, so July 1st appears to be that date, that decision date. So people look at July 1st, but you got to really look at the 1 to 2 weeks leading up to see what the NCAA does. So here's where we stand. You mentioned the states, those 5, and why is that really important? I believe, Stryker, the transfer portal in college closes on July 1st. So
okay. Yeah.
I think it's either right there, it's the week before, week after. It's right in that same time frame. Just I can't imagine that was a coincidence, but so as of July 1st, those states, within those states, their athletes are going to be allowed to earn compensation.
Wow.
For endorsement deals. There's obviously getting some restrictions on it. There's a weird one in Georgia where Georgia can take 75% of their athletes' earnings and put it in some type of pool and divvy it up to athletes in other sports to make it more.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know if it's more fair, but it's a weird little niche.
Yeah.
On a first level, right, this is going to create some type of recruiting edge for the transfer portal. It's certainly going to do it, but it's also going to create chaos just on an administrative level of what schools are going to be losing money, what schools are going to be allowed to put their resources back into the athletes. There's a bill kicking around in California now that's going to require basically all these schools, when they collect money from revenue from TV deals, whatever else, they have to give that back to the athletes. They can't put it in the performance center. They can't put it in the gym. It's a proposed bill. Yeah. That just speaks to the chaos that could ensue if July 1st goes off as planned. Listen, I want athletes to get paid, and I'm rooting for chaos. I'm an agent of chaos over here. This will help get it solved. But the NCAA is kind of dragging their heels as to whether or not they're going to come forward with their version of name, image, and likeness. That solves a couple problems because it gives those other 45 states something, but it's still something that's below these 5 other states. The only thing that can come in and really bail these guys out is a federal name, image, and likeness bill. But as we've seen, the legislature moves very, very slowly. I do not expect them to get anything done by July 1st. But there's a fancy concept in the law, Stryker, called federalism.
Okay.
If the federal government doesn't act in a particular area, states can do whatever they want.
Okay.
But the federal government pops in, for example, like the drinking age is a nice, clean 21 across the country. Wasn't always like that. Yes. Nice, clean number. If the federal government steps in for name, image, and likeness, or sports betting, or cannabis, any of those 3 areas, there's going to be uniform laws across the country. Without it, a little bit of chaos. I don't think it really matters for sports betting. I don't think it really matters for cannabis. It does matter for college sports because these other states are competing against each other for the NCAA title. So definitely chaos without it.
And looking at Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, that's majority of the SEC teams right there. So we already have a power conference that knows how to make money, giving them even more of a competitive advantage to get more talent in their schools is something that's a little tough and something the rest of the country needs to catch up.
Don't forget about New Mexico. They're in line to be the next powerhouse of the country.
It looks like it. I mean,
sleep on New Mexico over here.
What are they? The Sun Devils? No, Sun Devils are Arizona. I was
get that. It might be the Lobos.
Yes, that's it.
Lobos are Aztecs. I have Aztecs in my head.
Yeah.
It might be a New Mexico state that I'm thinking.
I know there's San Diego State Aztecs as well. So I get confused on everything.
They might be the Spartans.
Oh gosh,
we'll look this up.
There's too many mascots.
I'm pretty good at my mascots.
That's cool. That's cool. Well, we have an obscure one at UMBC where I went, and that's always been the Chesapeake Bay Retriever. Where the only time we won in the NCAA tournament, everybody thought it was a golden retriever. It's like, no, it's a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. Nobody's ever heard of this dog outside of our area.
Were you the 16 seed?
We were the 16 seed that beat the 1 seed.
I have a golden doodle, and I remember, giving her a shout out. I'm like, you're like kind of half of the retriever. You're the golden.
Yep. Well, If it was Chesapeake part, it would have been half of our retriever, but
There
still,
you go.
part retriever is fine. And so the last thing I wanted to touch base on today was, are there any other rule changes then within the NFL for this current year that fans should be? Thank you, Kat, for running across my screen and my computer. Is there any rule changes that that fans should know about for this upcoming year?
Yeah, there's a handful that are interesting. I think there were a bunch that were on the books that were fun, but I guess the most fun one that has got a lot of buzz on social, because again, a little pandemic related, a little bit of fun, because the rosters had to be so bloated during the pandemic era. The Chiefs actually had the suggestion, hey, let's give basically, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defensive backs, linebackers. Let's give these guys the odds to have these low fun numbers like you could use back in college back in the day. Mm-hmm. So that's going into effect this year. There's a kind of a weird quirk. I saw it, I think Dalvin Cook, this was the big story about him. He wanted to switch the number he wore back in the day. I believe he was at Florida State, if memory served. Mm-hmm. But I'm trying to think what number he was. I think he was 2 or 4. Anyway, a low number. Just trust me on that. But he wanted to switch to it for this year. So the way the NFL held the rule, they say, hey, listen, in order to switch to a new number, you have to individually buy out the old inventory of your jersey. So it costs you a pretty penny. If you want to switch to 2022, however, that'll be free. So that was the one that I thought was fun. I'm just going to rattle off a couple of these. They're not that many.
And also, too, it seems like, at least with the changing of the numbers, it's odd, though, if somebody changes from one team to another team, they can immediately change their number.
It's not really that fair.
You're staying with your team, you have to buy out that doesn't seem fair to the inventory aspect, at least.
Right, and a team could just cut you tomorrow, and I'm like, okay, what are they doing with the jersey? So I don't really think it's fair, but, it is what it is. Overtime eliminated in the preseason, which I think everyone was looking for. This one I thought was interesting. On the onside kicks, obviously there had been less onside kick recovery since they put the new rules in place. The old rules, I believe onside recoveries occurred at about a 20% clip. The new rules, it's like, I don't know, it's 5%.
5, if that. If 5.
Let's skip this, and hopefully people on video will get my hand signals over here. But with the new rules, you can basically put 11 guys when you're receiving the ball within 25 yards of the ball. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, it's a pretty big advantage. Now you can only put 9 guys within that 25 nexus of the ball. So it's going to create a little bit of a 10 on 9 if you want to include the kicker, 11 on 9, but it should help the numbers while also increasing safety because you're still not allowed that running head start. Stryker, what do you think of that one? I thought that was kind of interesting, creative.
It is, and I'm all for being able to create an opportunity to retain possession at a risk after the scoring a touchdown, scoring a field goal. Though I was really hoping, and I hope the NFL does eventually move to this, and that is to start on the 30-yard line, have a 4th and 15, and if you fail it, they pick up the ball where it was failed. The other team picks up the ball where it's failed, because that gives the offense a chance to push the ball down the field, create a first down. That's still a risky situation, but you're not talking about anything underneath a 20% anymore. You're talking about something that could be literally a third of the time being successful. And that, to me, as a fan, would be really exciting to watch.
Well, at least so there's something in the law called the public policy, like why a law passes in a certain sense, you have to make sure the public's behind it. So when we're talking about name, image, and likeness, all that stuff, the public's got to be behind it. Yeah. At least here, like you can't have the onside recovery be 1%. Why? Because people are going to turn off the games if it's a 2-possession game, because it's not possible. But if it's doable, or even the element of surprise, like I remember in the Super Bowl years back when the Saints had that onside kick, I think it was against the Colts in the Super Bowl, to start halftime. If I'm you got to have a little bit of the element of surprise, right? You want people taking bathroom breaks in the second half kickoff. But I think you got to bring those numbers up, and if you're really not going to allow the running head start, you got to have some way to include that. I guess there's I don't know, the fun one. Do you remember Stryker last year, the play when Brady threw the pass and it was blocked and then he caught it and then he threw it back to Evans?
Yes. Yeah, which was technically illegal for being but at the time you just got the penalty. Right. For the infraction, you didn't lose it down. So
now you're losing it down. They added that, which was they literally made it off of one play. And then the one that's not officially passed, but we think is going to pass. There's going to be new rules for blocks beneath the waist. So right now they have this interesting tackle zone, this tackle zone area. It's going to really impact running plays. You can't do that play outside of that tackle zone. So stay tuned. There's going to be
being in between the tackles is what you're saying.
Between the tackles. So we'll see if they end up passing that. I don't know what their delay was, but they obviously can still pass more rules before the start of the season. So we'll see. That one is, at least as I'm reading, that should be the biggest rule if it does pass, because it's going to be some retraining of running backs with these different chop blocks. So that's interesting to watch. But that could be a big one.
Well, that's at least helps out with the safety of the offensive linemen, which seem to never get safety aid at all in the NFL with any rule changes other than the chop block, which you just mentioned, which is just a vicious way to come down on the back of somebody's legs once they're already engaged. So yeah, moving forward, at least we got a couple things to look forward to, maybe some new numbers, maybe some new rules here, but like I said, I'm very, very happy that you were able to come back on the show with us. And Dan, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend a half an hour with us at Steeler Nation to make us more educated and more educated fans as far as understanding the rules and laws of the NFL.
My absolute pleasure. Say hello to your cat for me.
Will do.
He seems lovely.
She's great. And Steeler Nation, you've got to check out and follow Dan Lust on social media at Sports Law Lust, SPORTSLAWLUST on Twitter and Instagram. And cheers and thank you for joining us once again. We're happy to have you at any time. You can leave. Obviously, now I got to start reading off all my stuff, but I'll be chatting with you soon and I'll shoot you all the details once we got it. Got it up. No problem, Dan. Talk to you soon, man.
Bye-bye.
Steeler Nation, come over to SteelerNation.com for the best original Steelers news on the internet. Join us on our forum for excellent football discussions. Check out our clothing page for the best Steeler Nation tailgate wear on the planet. Be sure to subscribe to the Steeler Nation channel on YouTube so you can watch these vidcasts and podcasts live and even ask questions in real time in the comments section. That's at www.youtube.com/Steeler Nation. Tweet us at Steeler Nation, Instagram us at Steeler Nation.com, follow the Steeler Nation podcast on Twitter at _SN podcast, or follow me, your host, Stryker, on Twitter and Instagram at SN Stryker, spelled with a Y. Thank you for joining us on your SteelerNation.com podcast, sponsored by Total Sports Enterprises. I'm your host, G.Stryker, with Dan Lust, rooting along with you as always. Go Steelers!